Hey everyone, welcome back to Hong Kong Horror. It's summer now, and for some of you, that means it's travel season. Maybe you're headed overseas, exploring temples, beaches, or bustling night markets in Southeast Asia. And of course, what's a trip without a souvenir, right? A little trinket, maybe something that just calls out to you from a dusty corner shop. But what if I told you, not every souvenir is meant to be taken home, especially in some countries. Places where beliefs about spirits and the supernatural run deep. Grabbing the wrong object could bring something else back with you. Tonight's story is about a Hong Kong traveler who made that mistake. A middle-aged Hong Kong Silai, let's call her Ellen. A Silai is a Cantonese slang term. We call middle-aged housewives Silai. They're typically someone who's married, stays at home, and is often stereotyped as being chatty and very involved in local gossip. It's not an insult, it's more like calling someone a busybody auntie. This story was shared by a close friend of Ellen's, someone who was present from the very start of this nightmare, which happened in the late 90s. As usual, after our story, I'll share some cultural background on this, so stick around till the end. Let's dive right in. At the time, Ellen was doing well in life. She was in her mid-50s and owned several properties around Hong Kong. The rental income alone was more than enough to sustain her. She didn't work, and neither did her closest circle of friends. They all made a fortune in the stock market, along with housing prices in Hong Kong. They were all pretty much retired and just looking for other ways to pass the time. They traveled often. A familiar group of Silai, all retired, well off, and always looking for their next getaway. This time, it was Chiang Mai, Thailand. A week-long package tour, booked through a Hong Kong travel company. Everything was arranged, the flights, the hotels, the meals, and all the sightseeing. The first few days were everything they hoped for. They followed the tour bus from temple to market to cafe to waterfall, snapping photos and sampling local foods, laughing like schoolgirls again. On their last full day in Thailand, over breakfast at the hotel buffet, one of the women in the group mentioned something unexpected. She had a distant relative who had been living in Thailand for years now. Through him, she just found out about a local spiritual master, or shaman, who would be performing a rare ritual that evening. The location was just a short drive from their hotel. The woman leaned in, intrigued. It wasn't on the tour itinerary, but it sounded interesting. Something different. A chance to see something spiritual. They joked about asking for more luck in stocks, or a blessing for health or longevity. They weren't exactly superstitious, but they were curious, and it wasn't like they had anything else planned that night. So after dinner, the group of Silais stepped out of their usual comfort zone. No tour guide. Just the 6 of them, following a vague address written on the back of a hotel napkin. They had no idea what kind of ritual they were about to walk into. The building didn't look like much from the outside, just a single-story structure tucked behind a narrow alleyway. But as soon as the women stepped inside, they noticed that this wasn't like any of the temples they visited earlier in the week. No golden Buddhas, no incense wafting through the air. Instead, the room was dim and hushed, lit only by oil lamps placed along the walls. Strange talisman hung from ceiling beams. It felt less like religion, and more like something they'd seen in Thai horror movies. Folk magic, something secretive and old. The Silais hesitated, but they had come all this way, and there was about 30 locals gathered inside already. Most of them solemn, eyes fixed on the figure in the center of the room, the shaman, seated cross-legged, surrounded by offerings. Out of habit, the group tried to blend in, shuffling along the edges of the space, inching forward for a better view. The ritual lasted nearly an hour, chanting, smoke, sudden bursts of movement. To Ellen and her friends, it felt more like a fascinating performance. At the end, the shaman stood and held up 3 strings of dark, worn prayer beads. He announced that these were blessed items, and he would give them out for free to 3 lucky people in the room. The group of Silais didn't speak Thai, but one of the local members also spoke Cantonese, so she helped the Silais translate. Everyone surged forward to try to get one of these beads. Ellen didn't even know what these beads were for, but they were free and they were limited. Her hands shot up before she even thought about it, so did everyone else's. Somehow, hers was one of the hands he chose. Ellen was too thrilled. She laughed as she turned to her friends, holding it up proudly. None of them got one, just her. She felt lucky. In Cantonese, we have a saying, "Mo tam siu pi ni." Don't be greedy for small benefits. It's a phrase older folks say when something seems too good to be true. A quiet warning that free things often come with a hidden cost. I think this phrase fits perfectly to Ellen's situation here. Before dismissing the crowd, the shaman gave the 3 recipients a final set of instructions. They were to wear the beads every night, only at night, and before sleeping. They have to recite a short mantra in Thai. He repeated it very slowly, syllable by syllable, until they could memorize the rhythm. It was said to invite fortune, wealth, and prosperity, but only if done consistently, and only if done with faith. Ellen didn't understand a word of it, but the mantra was short and the rhythm stuck in her head like a tune. She repeated them under her breath until she memorized it. Back at the hotel, her friends teased her, half joking, half envious. "You're the lucky one. If it really brings you wealth, you better treat us all to dinner." Ellen laughed, clutching the beads like a prize. She felt special. The next morning, they boarded their flight back home to Hong Kong. The trip had come to an end, but Ellen didn't forget the beads. She followed the instructions precisely. Each night before bed, she stood in the bathroom mirror, slipped the beads over her neck, and chanted the mantra softly under her breath over and over again. At first, nothing changed. 2 weeks passed, no sudden windfall, no winning stocks. But then, Ellen began to hear a voice. It started faint, just a whisper behind her right ear, a mumble that wasn't Cantonese. She couldn't place it. She brushed it off, thinking maybe she had too many late nights playing mahjong. Her friends joked that she was just too obsessed with the ritual, but Ellen stayed consistent. She kept the routine, and the voice grew louder. Still foreign, but somehow, I felt like her body understood. One night, as she chanted before the mirror, Ellen's hands began to move on their own. Her fingers curled, twisted, made the shapes of strange symbols in the air like seals from an old folklore. She didn't recognize them. Her body simply acted. It unsettled her. She finally decided to stop. No more beads, no more chanting, just in case. But it didn't help. The voice didn't go away. The hand movements continued, especially between 3 and 4 a.m., when Ellen would suddenly wake, drenched in sweat, and find herself seated upright in bed, fingers moving in the dark like someone else was puppeteering her limbs. Friends told her that she looked tired. Then they said she looked sick. Her skin grew dull, the lines on her face deepened. She looked like she aged 2 years in just a few weeks. But still, she didn't know what the voice was saying. But every night, it was clearer. And the voice kept coming. Eventually, Ellen started experiencing insomnia. When she did manage to drift off, it was never restful. She had the same recurring nightmare every single night, always between 3 and 4 a.m. without fail. She found herself standing inside an old wooden hut, somewhere humid and dim, somewhere that felt like Southeast Asia. But it wasn't her. She wasn't in her own body. She was someone else entirely, a man, maybe in his 40s, his arms lean and sun-darkened. She could feel his muscles tense as he shouted, could feel his pulse racing. There was a woman across from him, young, crying, yelling back. The air was thick with anger. It was the middle of a violent argument. Ellen didn't understand the words, but the rage was unmistakable, blinding. Then the dream would shift. The man would now be standing on top of a tall building, a rooftop somewhere high up. And before Ellen could do anything, before she could even move, he would run, straight off the edge. That's when she would always wake up, heart pounding, sweat soaked. The same dream happening over and over again. Each time she remembered more detail, the sound of the woman's voice, the feel of the dirt floor in the hut, the wind on the rooftop. It wasn't just a dream, it felt like a memory. But it wasn't hers. Ellen didn't want to believe it at first, but after everything that had happened, the voices, the hand signs, the nightmares, there was only one conclusion that made sense. It had to be the beads. She pulled them from her drawer and dropped them straight into the trash can. But the voices didn't stop. If anything, they became more aggressive. Sometimes she heard it even during the daytime, like someone was standing behind her shoulder. She went to doctor after doctor, specialists, neurologists, scans, blood work. Everything came back clean. No explanation for what she was experiencing. That's when she remembered the tour guide from their trip. He had taken care of everything during the trip. Maybe he could help again. Ellen called him. She didn't hold anything back and told him everything. The man listened quietly. When she finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. He's heard of this before. Not often, but enough to know it wasn't just folklore. Some shamans in Thailand, not all, but a certain few were known to place intentional curses on unsuspecting tourists. They would hand out free gifts or blessings, often during mysterious ceremonies, and those items would serve as anchors, conduits for something else. And after a while, when the victim became desperate enough, the only solution was to go back to the shaman who started it. Of course, the removal of the curse wasn't free. It was some kind of spiritual extortion, and for someone like Ellen, there wouldn't be another way out. The guide agreed to help her. He would arrange transport, go with her even. He helped Ellen book her ticket for the same week. But something didn't want her to leave. On the day of her flight, Ellen arrived early to the airport. She looked exhausted, distant, but determined. Then, as she stood in line at the security checkpoint, the voice returned, sharp and insistent, like it was right next to her ear. She tried to ignore it, tried to keep moving, and then everything went black. She collapsed in the middle of the terminal. An ambulance came. By the time she regained consciousness, she was in the hospital. Doctors ran more tests. Again, nothing conclusive. No stroke, no seizure, no nothing. Still, they asked her to stay overnight for observation, just to be safe. That night, Ellen was placed in a private room on the 9th floor. No one knew exactly what happened in the late hours in the night. The nurse on duty said the call bell was never pressed, but at 3:47 a.m., Ellen jumped out of the window. Afterwards, the tour guide who was supposed to meet her began warning his clients to never attend rituals they didn't understand, and to never bring back something just because it was free. So, what do you think happened to Ellen here? There's a lot going on, but here's what I think happened. Ellen was linked to a soul through the beads. These prayer beads weren't a blessing, but rather a binding object designed to connect the person wearing them with a restless or vengeful spirit, most likely the man from her recurring nightmares. In some Southeast Asian occult practices, cursed objects are intentionally used as a vessel to offload a haunting, or pass a spirit onto someone else, often through ritual or contact. Once accepted, the bond is sealed. The time that Ellen keeps waking up every night between 3 to 4 a.m. is known as the spirit hour. This is known in many Asian spiritual systems as the time when ghosts are strongest and boundaries between the worlds are weakest. This explains why the spirit's influence intensifies at night, controlling Ellen's body, entering her dreams, and eventually possessing her completely. The recurring nightmare was a spiritual replay, or loop, but it's not her own. Ellen wasn't dreaming, she was being shown the final moments of the man's life, someone who passed violently. Ellen, seeing herself in his body in this dream, shows a type of identity overriding, a sign that the spirit was merging with her, preparing to replace her soul entirely. Finally, the fall from the 9th floor wasn't Ellen ending her own life. I think this was a complete spiritual takeover. By the time Ellen tried to go back to Thailand to remove the curse, it was a little too late. The bond was too deep, and the spirit refused to let her leave, because that would mean breaking the link between them. In many Thai and regional beliefs, people who died by ending their own life carry extremely heavy spiritual energy, especially if it's tied to emotional distress. These spirits can become very powerful ghosts. Dark practitioners, especially in Thai occultism, may collect or bind these troubled spirits to objects like bones, beads, or clothes, through rituals performed on site of death, or using personal remnants. In some cases, they even go to places where tragic deaths have happened and call out to the spirits, offering them vessels to attach to, promising freedom or purpose in exchange for being useful. Another possibility is that the man that Ellen kept seeing in her dream was once a victim of the same shaman, someone who attended a ritual just like Ellen did and fell into the same trap, ultimately dying just like in Ellen's dream. His soul, unable to reincarnate, may have been intentionally trapped in the prayer beads. We'll never know, but it's possible that Ellen became the next wandering spirit, another spirit to be used by the shaman for profit. The free beads were the bait, and by accepting them, wearing them, and chanting the mantra, Ellen unknowingly opened herself as a vessel. So if you guys are ever going to Southeast Asia, just remember, not everything you see is safe to be brought home. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode. Until we meet again next week,